Whispers echo through the ruins of Ironhold Castle, telling of a winter night when Lycan royalty bowed to fire. They cast a sightless servant into the freezing abyss, expecting her to perish silently. Instead, she awoke the dormant king of the skies. This is a tale of betrayal, fangs, and dragonfire. Centuries ago, nestled deep within the treacherous jagged valleys of the northern reaches, stood Ironhold Castle, a formidable fortress of stone and iron that served as the seat of the vanguard pack. It was a place where strength was the only currency, and weakness was an offense punishable by death. Within these cold, unforgiving walls lived Aurelia Hastings. She was a human, a fragile creature in a den of apex predators, but her most glaring vulnerability was her unseeing eyes. Born with a milky film over her irises, Aurelia lived in a world composed entirely of sound, texture, scent, and temperature. To the wolves of Ironhold, Aurelia was less than nothing. She was a scullery maid, kept alive only because her late mother, a renowned herbalist named Catelyn Hastings, had once saved the previous alpha's life from a bout of nightshade poisoning. But the old alpha was dead, and his son, King Abner Vanguard, now ruled with an iron fist and a heart forged in ice. Abner was a sovereign of unparalleled brutality and cunning. Under his reign, the Vanguard pack had decimated rival territories, absorbing the lands of the Harrington family and the sprawling Montgomery estates. Yet despite his terrifying reputation, Aurelia knew a different side of the Alpha King. She knew the heavy rhythmic thud of his boots pacing the grand library at midnight, the sharp intake of breath when the burdens of the crown weighed too heavily upon his broad shoulders, and the scent of pine and crisp winter air that clung to his velvet cloak whenever he stood near her. Though she could not see him, the mate bond had begun to whisper its ancient song between them. It was a subtle, terrifying pull. Abner felt it too. He would often linger in the kitchens or the tapestry rooms when Aurelia was scrubbing the stone floors, his golden wolf eyes fixed upon her delicate, soot-stained face. But a blind human maid could never be Luna. The pack elders, particularly the ruthless Elder Gideon Croft, demanded an alliance of pure, untainted Lycan blood. They demanded Lady Brooklyn Jones. Lady Brooklyn was the pride of the wealthy Jones lineage, a family that controlled the eastern silver mines. She was hailed as the most beautiful she-wolf in a century, possessing a coat of pure, shimmering white and an ambition that rivaled the king's. She was also unfathomably cruel, harboring a deep, venomous jealousy toward the blind maid. Brooklyn possessed the sharp senses of a predator, and she did not miss the way King Abner's gaze would soften when Aurelia entered a room, nor the way he subtly altered his path to avoid stepping on the maid's sweeping brush. To Brooklyn, Aurelia was a stain on the immaculate tapestry of Ironhold, a pathetic creature that needed to be eradicated before the grand winter gala, the night Abner was expected to announce his chosen Luna. As the gala approached, the castle was a hive of frenzied activity. Emissaries from the neighboring territories, Duke Reginald of Oakhaven, the fierce warlords of the Harlaw estate, and the cunning diplomats from the Valerius pack arrived in droves. Aurelia worked until her hands were blistered and her bones ached. She polished silver goblets until she could feel their flawless curves, and she carried heavy bundles of firewood up the spiraling, draughty staircases. One evening, mere days before the gala, Aurelia was tasked with delivering fresh linens to Lady Brooklyn's chambers. As she navigated the corridors, her fingertips trailing lightly against the damp stone walls to guide her, she overheard hushed voices slipping through an ajar door. "The human is a distraction," Elder Gideon Croft was murmuring, his voice like grinding stones. The The king's wolf is restless. He rejects the ceremonial mating scents. I fear he is drawn to the Hastings girl." "She is a blind rat," Lady Brooklyn hissed, her silken voice dripping with disdain. "Abner is a king. He cannot possibly entertain the notion of taking a defective human as a mate. It would incite a rebellion." "Do not underestimate the pull of the fates, Brooklyn. If the king's wolf claims her during the blood moon at the Gala, the pack will be thrown into chaos. We must remove the temptation." Aurelia's breath caught in her throat. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She took a step back, her worn leather shoe scraping softly against the stone. "Who is there?" Brooklyn snapped, the sound of her claws extending, echoing sharply. Aurelia turned and fled, relying on her intimate knowledge of the castle's layout to lose herself in the labyrinthine servants' quarters. She survived that night, but a target had been painted unequivocally on her back. The air in Ironhold grew thicker, suffocating her with the impending dread of a trap waiting to be sprung. She was a pawn in a brutal game of lichen politics, and the wolves were closing in. The night of the Winter Gala arrived, bringing with it a blizzard that howled against the fortress walls like a chorus of damned souls. Inside the great hall, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of roasted meats, spiced wine, and the overwhelming musky pheromones of hundreds of dominant lichens. The hall was an opulent display of power. Tapestries depicting legendary wolf victories hung from the rafters, and massive chandeliers cast a brilliant warm glow over the revelers. Aurelia was ordered to serve wine to the high tables, a task usually reserved for higher-ranking servants. She wore a simple faded woolen dress, her dark hair pulled back severely. Moving through the dense crowd was terrifying. Lichens bumped into her, intentionally sneering at her clumsiness, their low growls vibrating in her chest. Yet she navigated the hall with a quiet dignity, her silver tray perfectly balanced. King Abner sat at the head of the colossal oak table, draped in dark furs, his presence a heavy, oppressive gravity that Aurelia could feel from across the room. Next to him sat Lady Brooklyn, resplendent in jewels, exuding an aura of smug triumph. As Aurelia approached the high table to refill the king's goblet, she felt the sudden sharp shift in the air. The scent of Abner pine snow and raw power flared with a sudden panicked intensity. Before she could pour the wine, Lady Brooklyn suddenly stood up her chair, scraping violently against the floorboards. "Thief!" Brooklyn shrieked, her voice cutting through the ambient noise of the great hall like a blade. The music stopped instantly. A deadly silence fell over the room. "What is the meaning of this, Brooklyn?" King Abner rumbled, his voice echoing with authoritative thunder. "My family's heirloom. The Jones Star, a diamond passed down through 6 generations of Alphas. It is gone from my chambers." Brooklyn pointed a dramatic, trembling finger directly at Aurelia. "And I know who took it. The blind rat who delivered my linens. I took nothing." "My lady," Aurelia stammered, her voice shaking as she clutched her serving tray. "I swear it." Elder Gideon Croft stepped forward from the shadows, his heavy boots echoing ominously. "A simple claim to test King Abner. Let the girl be searched." Before Abner could object, 2 massive guards seized Aurelia by the arms, causing her tray to clatter noisily to the floor. One of the guards roughly patted down her woolen apron. With a feigned gasp, he pulled his hand from her deep pocket and held something aloft. Even without eyes, Aurelia knew what had happened. The heavy, cold weight of the stone had been slipped into her pocket in the crush of the crowd just moments before she reached the table. Gasps erupted from the nobility. "She carries the Jones Star," the guard announced. "A thief!" Brooklyn sneered, stepping closer so Aurelia could smell her cloying rose perfume. "A treacherous, deceitful human who steals from her betters." The punishment for stealing from a noble house is clear, Abner. Pack law demands it." Aurelia turned her blind face toward the head of the table, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Abner, your grace, please. I am innocent. You know I have no use for jewels. I cannot even see them." Abner stood the sheer force of his movement, causing the surrounding nobles to step back. Aurelia could hear his heart pounding a frantic, torn rhythm. He knew she was innocent. The mate bond, though unconsummated, pulsed with her terror and truth. But as he looked out at the sea of expectant, bloodthirsty faces, the warlords of Harlaw, the Duke of Oakhaven, and his own mutinous elders, he realized he was trapped. To save a human servant over the word of his highest-ranking noblewoman would ignite a civil war he could not currently win. His throne, his pack's stability, hung in the balance. "The law is absolute," Abner finally said. His voice was devoid of emotion, a hollow shell of the man she had secretly come to care for. But beneath the stoicism, Aurelia heard the faint tremor of cowardice. "Aurelia Hastings, you are stripped of your protection under the Vanguard pack. You are banished from Ironhold. Cast her out into the Whispering Peaks." A collective murmur of cruel approval rippled through the hall. Banishment into the Whispering Peaks during a blizzard was a death sentence. No human could survive the sub-zero temperatures, nor the savage rogue wolves that roamed the jagged cliffs. Tears spilled from Aurelia's unseeing eyes, freezing almost instantly on her pale cheeks as the guards dragged her backward. "You are a coward, Abner," she cried out, her voice breaking. "You are no true king." The heavy iron doors of the castle were hauled open, letting in a blast of blinding, freezing snow. They threw her out onto the unforgiving cobblestones. The doors slammed shut with a deafening final thud, locking away the warmth, the light, and the man who had betrayed her. Aurelia was alone in the dark and the cold. The wind howled like a banshee, biting through her thin dress, stealing the warmth from her blood. She forced herself to her feet, her hands numb, and began to walk. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she could not die on their doorstep to give Brooklyn the satisfaction of finding her frozen corpse in the morning. For hours she trudged blindly through the waist-deep snow, her bare hands desperately feeling the bark of frozen pines to keep her bearings. Hypothermia began to weave its deadly comforting spell over her mind. Her legs gave out. She tumbled down a steep embankment, sliding over jagged rocks and ice until she crashed violently onto a flat, solid surface. She dragged herself forward, realizing the wind had suddenly died down. The air here was warmer, the scent of sulfur, ancient dust, and something metallic like melted copper filled her nose. She had fallen into a subterranean cavern. As she lay there waiting for the end, a sound vibrated through the stone beneath her. It was a slow, rhythmic thumping, vastly deeper and slower than any lichen's heartbeat. Thump, thump. The ground grew noticeably warmer. Aurelia, shivering uncontrollably, crawled toward the source of the heat. Her small, frost-bitten hands reached out in the darkness and pressed against something impossible. It was a wall of scales, each one the size of a shield, radiating an intense, furnace-like heat. A low, rumbling growl echoed through the cavern, a sound so immense it shook the dust from the cavern ceiling. It was not a wolf. It was something older, something divine. "Who dares touch the scales of Ethan?" A voice boomed, not in the air, but directly inside Aurelia's mind. It was a voice of crackling flames and grinding tectonic plates. Aurelia did not pull her hand away. Her blindness had spared her the paralyzing terror that the sight of the colossal obsidian-scaled dragon would have instilled in any lichen warrior. "I am Aurelia," she whispered, her voice barely a rasp. I have been cast out to die. If you are going to eat me, beast, do it quickly." A massive exhale of hot air washed over her, smelling of ash and ancient magic. The dragon shifted the sound of its massive chains, clinking together, echoing in the dark. It had been bound here for a millennia by the first Lichen Kings, a secret kept beneath the whispering peaks. "You do not cower, sightless one." The dragon rumbled, leaning its massive snout closer. Ethan drew in a deep breath, inhaling her scent. Suddenly the cavern fell deathly silent. The blood of the old riders. Ethan breathed a spark of reverence, igniting in his telepathic voice. "It runs in your veins. The Hastings line. I have waited 1,000 years for the scent of my true masters to return to this wretched mountain." Aurelia's unseeing eyes widened in the dark. The lichens had banished a blind maid to die in the snow. They had no idea they had just returned the rightful queen of the skies to her throne. Warmth flooded Aurelia's shivering frame, seeping past the freezing dampness of her woolen dress and into her very marrow. Ethan, the obsidian leviathan, exhaled another gentle breath over her fragile human form, a mystical furnace that drove the biting winter chill from her limbs. For a woman who had known only the dark, cold corners of a lichen fortress, this immense heat was nothing short of divine intervention. "My mother never spoke of dragons," Aurelia whispered, her voice gaining strength as the lethal hypothermia retreated. She kept her small hands pressed firmly against the impenetrable armor of his scales. She was merely a humble herbalist serving the vanguard pack. How could I carry the lineage of riders? History is written by the victors. Little one, Ethan's voice resonated within her mind, carrying the weight of centuries. "And wolves are notorious liars. Your ancestor, Lady Genevieve Hastings, was the last of the Dragon Guard. When the Lycans sought to conquer these valleys, they could not defeat us in open combat. Instead, they used treachery. They poisoned the local water sources with liquid nightshade, weakening the great drakes. Then they blinded Lady Genevieve, ensuring she could never again guide me through the treacherous skies, and sealed me beneath this mountain." Aurelia gasped, the historical revelation aligning perfectly with the brutal nature of the wolves she knew so well. The irony was suffocating. Her mother Catelyn had used nightshade antidotes to save the previous alpha, utilizing the exact botanical knowledge her ancestors had developed to survive the lichen chemical warfare. The blindness that afflicted Aurelia was not a random genetic curse, but a residual hex of dark magic passed down through generations meant to keep the Dragon Guard dormant. "I am nothing but a banished maid," Aurelia confessed, a bitter tear sliding down her cheek. "Even if I possess the heritage, I lack the sight to guide you. I am broken. The covenant of my kind is a remedy for all mortal flaws." The beast rumbled, shifting his massive weight. The cavern echoed with the terrifying symphony of grinding chains. "To forge the bond, you must accept my essence. It will burn Aurelia Hastings. It will shatter the remnants of your mortal frailty. But if you survive, you shall reclaim what was stolen from your family." Aurelia did not hesitate. The memory of Abner's cowardly silence and Brooklyn's venomous triumph fueled a newfound inferno within her soul. "Do it!" she commanded. Ethan lowered his colossal head until his snout touched her chest. A searing, blinding light erupted in the pitch-black cavern. Aurelia screamed as a surge of pure, liquid fire rushed through her veins. It felt as though her bones were turning to molten iron, her human frailty evaporating in an agonizing crucible of ancient magic. The hex that clouded her vision ignited. The milky film over her eyes dissolved into vapor. When the agonizing heat finally subsided, Aurelia blinked. For the first time in her life, she saw. She saw the jagged, glittering stalactites hanging from the cavern ceiling. She saw the magnificent, terrifying visage of Ethan, his obsidian scales shimmering with an inner volcanic light. And when she looked down at a small, still pool of mountain water nearby, she saw herself. Her eyes were no longer milky white. They were glowing reptilian slits of brilliant amber, the eyes of a dragon. Meanwhile, high above in the treacherous halls of Ironhold Celebration, masked a rotting core of conspiracy. Lady Brooklyn Jones stood in her opulent chambers, sipping a goblet of aged plum wine. Across from her sat Lord Gregory Chamberlain, a notorious and wealthy conspirator from the southern coastal territories, known privately as the architect of many noble downfalls. "The deed is done, Gregory." Brooklyn purred, admiring the Jones star, which she had quietly retrieved from the guards. "The blind rat is freezing in the peaks, and Abner is completely broken. He paces his chambers like a caged beast. His spirit is entirely subdued. Do not underestimate a cornered alpha." Lord Gregory warned, adjusting his velvet doublet. "You must solidify your position immediately. Tomorrow is the winter solstice. Demand the mating ceremony. Once the pack witnesses the binding, his power is effectively halved and shared with you. And if he refuses," Brooklyn asked, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her crystal goblet. Lord Gregory smiled, a sinister stretching of thin lips. "Then we reveal the documents proving his father illegitimately acquired the Montgomery estates. The warlords of Harlaw would tear him apart. He has no choice, Brooklyn. He is yours to command." Deep in the king's quarters, Abner Vanguard was tearing his grand library apart. Books lay shredded on the floor. Ancient mahogany desks were smashed to splinters. His wolf was howling in absolute agony, clawing at his mind. The mate bond, which should have faded with Aurelia's demise, was not dying. Instead, it was mutating. It no longer felt like the gentle pull of a helpless human. It felt like a roaring, terrifying inferno. He found a hidden compartment in the servant's ledger, revealing the truth of Aurelia's lineage, a secret his father had guarded with his life. When Abner read the name, Dragon Guard, a sickening realization washed over him. He had not merely banished an innocent woman. He had thrown a match into a powder keg that had been waiting 1,000 years to explode. The winter solstice dawned with a cruel, biting frost. The great hall of Ironhold was transformed into a sanctuary of dark, lichened tradition. Banners of stark white and crimson hung from the rafters. The entirety of the Vanguard pack, alongside the visiting nobility, gathered to witness the union of King Abner and Lady Brooklyn. Abner stood upon the grand dais, looking completely hollowed out. He wore his ceremonial armor, but his golden eyes were dull, completely devoid of the Alpha's commanding spark. Beside him, Brooklyn was practically glowing with victory, adorned in a gown of spun silver and white fur. Elder Gideon Croft stood before them, holding the ceremonial binding cords. "We gather under the watchful gaze of our ancestors." Gideon's voice boomed over the hushed crowd, "to bind the strongest of our lineages. Today, we crown a new Luna. Today, our power is cemented." Brooklyn extended her wrists, offering a triumphant smirk to the lords and ladies who had doubted her. Abner slowly raised his hands, his movements heavy and reluctant. He felt physically sick. The air in the hall felt impossibly thin, suffocating him. "Do you, King Abner Vanguard, accept this female as your equal, your mate and your Luna?" Gideon asked, raising the silver cords. Abner opened his mouth to speak the binding words, but a sound interrupted him. It started as a deep, resonant vibration beneath the stone floor. Goblets rattled on the tables. The grand chandeliers began to sway violently. Panic rippled through the gathered lichens as the vibration grew into a deafening, terrifying roar. that seemed to split the very foundation of the earth. "Earthquake!" a guard shouted, but he was violently silenced as the massive reinforced iron doors of the great hall glowed a furious cherry red. Within seconds, the thick iron melted like wax, pooling onto the cobblestones in a wave of unbearable heat. The doors exploded inward, sending shards of molten metal and stone shrapnel flying across the room. Screams erupted. Lichens shifted into their monstrous forms, their instincts screaming of an apex predator. Through the billowing smoke and ash, a figure strode into the great hall. The crowd fell into a stunned, paralyzed silence. It was Aurelia. But she was no longer the frail, sightless maid they had condemned. She was clad in armor, forged from pure, dark volcanic glass. A heavy cape of crimson silk billowed behind her. In her hand, she held a massive broadsword, its blade glowing with an inner eternal heat. "Aurelia," Abner breathed, taking a desperate step forward, his heart hammering with a mixture of profound relief and overwhelming terror. She raised her head, and the entire hall gasped. Her eyes burned with terrifying amber light. Before anyone could move, the roof of the great hall was torn away. Massive stone blocks crashed into the courtyard below. Ethan descended his gargantuan obsidian form, blocking out the pale winter sun. The dragon unleashed a roar that sent half the gathered lichen warriors dropping to their knees, their hands clutching their bleeding ears. The beast draped his massive spiked tail protectively around Aurelia, his maw dripping with embers. "Guards, kill her!" Brooklyn shrieked, her regal facade shattering into sheer hysteria. "Kill the beast!" Not a single lichen moved. To attack the dragon was absolute suicide. Lord Gregory Chamberlain attempted to sneak toward the servant's exit, but Ethan snapped his jaws, exhaling a precise line of flame that vaporized the exit door, trapping the conspirator. Aurelia walked slowly toward the dais. Her gaze swept over the cowering nobles, the terrified elders, and finally rested on the king who had cast her out. "You speak of power. Elder Gideon," Aurelia's voice rang out clear and commanding, amplified by the magic vibrating within her. "You speak of strong lineages, yet you build your kingdom on lies, treachery, and the stolen heritage of my family. Aurelia, please!" Abner pleaded, his voice breaking. He dropped to his knees before her, ignoring the shocked gasps of his pack. "I was a fool. I was trapped by the law. I felt the bond. I know you are my true mate. Forgive me." Aurelia looked down at the Alpha King, her draconian eyes devoid of any lingering affection. "A true king changes the law for the innocent. A coward hides behind it. The bond between us died in the snow, Abner. I am not your mate. I am your reckoning." She turned her burning gaze to Brooklyn, who was trembling violently against the stone altar. "As for you, Lady Jones, you prized your jewels and your status above a human life. You manipulated a weak ruler and condemned me to the ice. I am a noble." Brooklyn stammered, backing away until she hit the wall. "You cannot touch me." "I do not need to," Aurelia stated coldly. She looked at Lord Gregory, who was sweating profusely near the destroyed door. "Lord Chamberlain, tell the pack how you and Lady Brooklyn planned to blackmail their king with forged documents regarding the Montgomery estates. Tell them how you planted the Jones star in my pocket." Under the terrifying glare of the dragon, Lord Gregory collapsed, spilling every detail of their treasonous plot. The great hall erupted into chaos. The warlords of Harlaw turned their furious, predatory gazes upon Brooklyn and her family. The Jones guards immediately dropped their weapons, refusing to defend a traitor. Aurelia raised her hand, and the hall instantly fell silent again. "Ironhold does not belong to the Vanguard pack," Aurelia declared, her voice echoing through the ruined fortress. It was built over the prison of the Dragon Guard. This land belongs to the skies. She walked to the edge of the dais, looking out over the hundreds of bowing lichens. Even Alpha King Abner remained on his knees, his head bowed in absolute defeat and sorrow. He had lost everything: his crown, his pride, and the only woman his soul had ever recognized. "You may remain in these lands," Aurelia proclaimed, mounting the massive scaled shoulder of Ethan. "But you will no longer rule them. The era of the wolf is over." With a powerful thrust of his hind legs, Ethan launched into the sky, his massive wings beating against the winter air, clearing the smoke and ash from the valleys. Aurelia Hastings, the banished blind maid, soared above the clouds, not as a servant, and not as a Luna, but as the undisputed queen of the northern reaches. The dragons had returned. Thank you for exploring this epic tale of betrayal, ancient magic, and ultimate revenge. If you loved Aurelia's incredible transformation from a banished maid into the fierce dragon queen, please hit that like button. Don't forget to share this story with your fellow fantasy and romance lovers, and subscribe to the channel for more thrilling stories, unexpected twists, and magical adventures. Your support helps bring more amazing legends to life.